The Slaying of Sohrab, from Sohrab and Rustum, by Matthew Arnold, from The World's Best Poetry, Volume 9, Tragedy and Humour, Part 1. Read for LibriVox.org by Craig Franklin as the narrator,
Thomas Peter as Sohrab,
and Jason in Canada as Rustum.
The Slaying of Sohrab, from Sohrab and Rustum. He spake, and Rustum answered not, but hurled his spear down from the shoulder. Down it came, as on some partridge in the corn a hawk that long has towered in the airy clouds drops like a plummet. Sohrab saw it come, and sprang aside quick as a flash. The spear hissed and went quivering down into the sand, which it sent flying wide. Then Sohrab threw in turn, and full struck Rustum's shield. Sharp rang the iron plates, rang sharp, but turned the spear. And Rustum seized his club, which none but he could wield. An unlapping trunk it was, and huge, still rough, like those which men in treeless plains, to build them boats, fish from the flooded rivers, Hyphasis or Hydaspes, when high up by their dark springs the wind in winter time has made in Himalayan forests wrack, and strewn the channels with torn boughs. So huge the club which Rustum lifted now, and struck one stroke. But again Sohrab sprang aside, lithe as the glancing snake, and the club came thundering to earth, and leapt from Rustum's hand. And Rustum followed his own blow, and fell to his knees, and with his fingers clutched the sand. And now might Sohrab have unsheathed his sword, and pierced the mighty Rustum, while he lay dizzy, and on his knees, and choked with sand. But he looked up and smiled, nor bared his sword, but courteously drew back, and spoke, and said,
Thou strik'st too hard. That club of thine will float upon the summer floods, and not my bones. But rise, and be not wroth. Not wroth am I. No, when I see thee, wrath forsakes my soul. Thou sayest thou art not Rustum. Be it so. Who art thou, then, that canst so touch my soul? Boy as I am, I have seen battles too, have waded foremost in their bloody waves, and heard their hollow roar of dying men. But never was my heart thus touched before. Are they from heaven, these softenings of the heart? O thou old warrior, let us yield to heaven. Come, plant we here in earth our angry spears, and make a truce, and sit upon this sand, and pledge each other in red wine like friends. And thou shalt talk to me of Rustum's deeds. There are enough foes in the Persian host whom I may meet, and strike, and feel no pang. Champions enough Aphrasiah pass, whom thou mayst fight. Fight them when they confront thy spear. But oh, let there be peace twixt thee and me.
He ceased. But while he spake, Rustum had risen, and stood erect, trembling with rage. His club he left to lie, but had regained his spear, whose fiery point now in his mailed right hand blazed bright and baleful, like the autumn star, the baleful sign of fevers. Dust had soiled his stately crest, and dimmed his glittering arms. His breast heaved, his lips foamed, and twice his voice was choked with rage. At last these words broke way.
Girl, nimble with thy feet, not with thy hands, curled minion, dancer, coiner of sweet words, fight, let me hear thy hateful voice no more. Thou art not in Aphrasiab's gardens now, with Tartar girls, with whom thou art wont to dance, but on the Oxus sands, and in the dance of battle, and with me, who make no play of war. I fight it out, and hand to hand. Speak not to me of truce, and pledge, and wine. Remember all thy valor, try thy feints and cunning. All the pity I had is gone. because thou hast shamed me before both the hosts, with thy light skipping tricks and thy girl's wiles.
He spoke, and Sohrab kindled at his taunts, and he too drew his sword. At once they rushed together, as two eagles on one prey, come rushing down together from the clouds, one from the east, one from the west. Their shields dashed with a clang together, and a din rose, such as the sinewy woodcutters make often in the forest's heart at morn, of hewing axes, crashing trees. Such blows Rustum and Sohrab on each other hailed, and you would say that sun and stars took part in that unnatural conflict. For a cloud grew suddenly in heaven, and darkened the sun over the fighters' heads, and a wind rose under their feet, and moaning swept the plain, and in a sandy whirlwind wrapped the pair. In gloom they twain were wrapped, and they alone. For both the onlooking hosts on either hand stood in broad daylight, and the sky was pure, and the sun sparkled on the Oxus stream. But in the gloom they fought, with bloodshot eyes and labouring breath. First Rustum struck the shield, which Sohrab held stiff out. The steel-spiked spear rent the tough plates, but failed to reach the skin. And Rustum plucked it back with angry groan. Then Sohrab with his sword smote Rustum's helm, nor clove its steel quite through, but all the crest he shore away, and that proud horsehair plume, never till now defiled, sunk to the dust. And Rustum bowed his head. But then the gloom grew blacker, thunder rumbled in the air, and lightnings rent the cloud, and Ruksh the horse, who stood at hand, uttered a dreadful cry. No horse cry was that, more like the roar of some pained desert lion, who all day has trailed the hunter's javelin in his side, and comes at night to die upon the sand. The two hosts heard the cry and quaked for fear, and Oxus curdled as it crossed his stream. But Sohrab heard, and quailed not, but rushed on, and struck again, and again Rustum bowed his head. But this time all the blade, like glass, sprang in 1,000 shivers on the helm, and in his hand the hilt remained alone. Then Rustum raised his head, his dreadful eyes glared, and he shook on high his menacing spear, and shouted,
Rustum!
Sohrab heard that shout, and shrank amazed. Back he recoiled one step, and scanned with blinking eyes the advancing form. And then he stood bewildered, and he dropped his covering shield, and the spear pierced his side. He reeled, and staggered back, sunk to the ground. And then the gloom dispersed, and the wind fell, and the bright sun broke forth and melted all the cloud. And the two armies saw the pair, saw Rustum standing safe upon his feet, and Sohrab wounded on the bloody sand. Then, with a bitter smile, Rustum began.
Sohrab, thou thoughtest in thy mind to kill a Persian lord this day, and strip his corpse, and bear thy trophies to Afrasahib's tent, or else that the great Rustum would come down himself to fight, and that thy wiles would move his heart to take a gift and let thee go. And then all the Tartar host would praise thy courage or thy craft, and spread thy fame, to glad thy father in his weak old age. Fool! Thou art slain, and by an unknown man. Dearer to the red jackals shalt thou be than to thy friends and to thy father old.
And with a fearless mien Sohrab replied,
Unknown thou art, yet thy fierce vaunt is vain. Thou dost not slay me, proud and boastful man. No, Rustum slays me, in this filial heart. For were I matched with 10 such men as thou, and I were he who till to-day I was, they should be lying here, I standing there. But that beloved name unnerved my arm, that name, and something I confess in thee, which troubles all my heart, and made my shield fall, and thy spear transfixed an unarmed foe. Now thou boastest and insult'st my fate. But hear thou this, fierce man, tremble to hear. The mighty Rustum shall avenge my death. My father, whom I seek through all the world, he shall avenge my death, and punish thee.
So Rustum knew not his own loss, but stood over his dying son, and knew him not. But with a cold, incredulous voice he said,
What prate is this of fathers and revenge? The mighty Rustum never had a son.
And with a failing voice Sohrab replied,
Ah, yes, he had, and that lost son am I. Surely the news will one day reach his ear, reach Rustum where he sits and tarries long somewhere, I know not where, but far from here, and pierce him like a stab, and make him leap to arms, and cry for vengeance upon thee. Fierce man, bethink thee for an only son. What will that grief, what will that vengeance be? Oh, could I live till I that grief had seen! Yet him I pity not so much, but her, my mother, who in Ader-baijan dwells with that old king, her father, who grows grey with age, and rules over the valiant Kurds. Her most I pity, who no more will see Sohrab returning from the Tartar camp, with spoils and honour, when the war is done, but a dark rumour will be bruited up, from tribe to tribe, until it reach her ear. And then will that defenceless woman learn that Sohrab will rejoice her sight no more, but that in battle with a nameless foe, by the far distant Oxus, he is slain.
and Rustum gazed on him with grief and said,
O Sohrab, thou indeed art such a son whom Rustum, wert thou his, might well have loved. Yet here thou errest, Sohrab, or else men have told thee false. Thou art not Rustum's son, for Rustum had no son. One child he had, but one, a girl, who with her mother now plies some light female task, nor dreams of us. Of us she dreams not, nor of wounds, nor war.
But Sohrab answered him in wrath, for now the anguish of the deep-fixed spear grew fierce, and he desired to draw forth the steel, and let the blood flow free, and so to die. But first he would convince his stubborn foe, and rising sternly on one arm, he said,
Man, who art thou who dost deny my words? Truth sits upon the lips of dying men, and falsehood, while I lived, was far from mine. I tell thee, pricked upon this arm I bear that seal which Rustum to my mother gave, that she might prick it on the babe she bore.
He spoke, and all the blood left Rustum's cheeks, and his knees tottered, and he smote his hand against his breast, his heavy mailed hand, that the hard iron corselet clanked aloud. And to his heart he pressed the other hand, and in a hollow voice he spake, and said,
Sohrab, that were a proof which could not lie. If thou show this, then art thou Rustum's son.
Then with weak hasty fingers Sohrab loosed his belt, and near the shoulder bared his arm, and showed a sign in faint vermilion points pricked, as a cunning workman in Pekin pricks with vermilion some clear porcelain vase, an emperor's gift. At early morn he paints, and all day long, and when night comes, the lamp lights up his studious forehead and thin hands. So delicately pricked the sign appeared on Sohrab's arm, the sign of Rustum's seal. It was that griffin, which of old reared Zal, Rustum's great father, whom they left to die, a helpless babe among the mountain rocks. Him that kind creature found and reared and loved. Then Rustum took it for his glorious sign, and Sohrab bared that figure on his arm, and himself scanned it, long with mournful eyes, and then he touched it with his hand and said,
How sayest thou? Is that sign the proper sign of Rustum's son, or of some other man's?
He spoke, but Rustum gazed and stood speechless, and then he uttered one sharp cry.
O boy, thy father!
And his voice choked there, and then a dark cloud passed before his eyes, and his head swam, and he sank down to earth. But Sohrab crawled to where he lay, and cast his arms about his neck, and kissed his lips, and with fond, faltering fingers stroked his cheeks, trying to call him back to life. And life came back to Rustum, and he opened his eyes, and they stood wide with horror, and he seized in both his hands the dust which lay around, and threw it on his head, and smirched his hair and face and beard and glittering arms, and strong convulsive groanings shook his breast, and his sobs choked him, and he clutched his sword to draw it and for ever let life out. But Sohrab saw his thought and held his hands, and with a soothing voice he spoke and said,
Father, forbear, for I but meet to-day the doom that on my birth was written down in heaven, and thou art heaven's unconscious hand. Surely my heart cried out that it was thou, when first I saw thee, and thy heart spoke too, I know it. But fate trod those promptings down under its iron heel. Fate engaged the strife, and hurled me on my father's spear. But let us speak no more of this. I find my father. Let me feel that I have found. Come, sit beside me on this sand, and take my head betwixt thy hands, and kiss my cheeks, and wash them with thy tears, and say, my son, quick, quick! For numbered are my sands of life, and swift, for like the lightning to this field I came, and like the wind I go away, sudden and swift, and like a passing wind. But it was written in heaven that this should be.
So said he, and his voice released the heart of Rustum, and his tears broke forth. He cast his arms round his son's neck, and wept aloud, and kissed him, and awe fell on both the hosts, when they saw Rustum's grief. And Ruksh the horse, with his head bowing to the ground, and mane sweeping the dust, came near, and in mute woe, first to the one, then to the other, moved his head, as if inquiring what their grief might mean. And from his dark, compassionate eyes the big, warm tears rolled down and caked the sand. But Rustum chid him with stern voice, and said,
Ruksh, now thou grievest, but, O Ruksh, thy feet should then have rotted on thy nimble joints, when first they bore thy master to this field.
But Sohrab looked upon the horse, and said,
Is this then Ruksh? How often in past days my mother told me of thee, thou brave steed, my terrible father's terrible horse, and said that I should one day find thy lord in thee. Come, let me lay my hand upon thy mane. O Ruksh, thou art more fortunate than I, for thou hast gone where I shall never go, and snuffed the breezes of my father's home. And thou hast trod the sands of Seistan, and seen the river of Helmund, and the lake of Zerah. The aged Zal himself has often stroked thy neck, and given thee food, corn in a golden platter soaked with wine, and said, O Ruksh, bear Rustum well. But I have never known my grandsire's furrowed face, nor seen his lofty house in Seistan, nor slaked my thirst at the clear Helmund stream, but lodged among my father's foes, and seen after Sayyab's cities only, Samarkand, Bokhara, and lone Khiva in the waste, and the black Turkmund tents, and only drunk the desert rivers, Mogab and Tejan, Koik and where the Kalmucks feed their sheep, the northern Sur, and this great Oxus stream, the yellow Oxus by whose brink I die.
And with a heavy groan Rustum replied,
Oh, that its waves were flowing over me! Oh, that I saw its grains of yellow silt roll tumbling in the current o'er my head!
and with a grave mild voice Sohrab replied,
Desire not that, my father. Thou must live, for some are born to do great deeds, and live, as some are born to be obscured, and die. Do thou the deeds I die too young to do, and reap a second glory in thine age. Thou art my father, and thy gain is mine. But come, thou seest this great host of men which follow me. Pray thee, slay not these. Let me entreat for them. What have they done? They followed me, my hope, my fame, my star. Let them all cross the Oxus back in peace. But me thou must bear hence, not sent with them, but carry me with thee to Seistan, and place me on a bed, and mourn for me. Thou, and the snow-haired Zal, and all thy friends. And thou must lay me in that lovely earth, and heap a stately mound above my bones, and plant a far-seen pillar over all, that so the passing horseman on the waste may see my tomb a great way off, and say, Sohrab, the mighty Rustum's son, lies there, whom his great father did in ignorance kill, and I be not forgotten in my grave.
and with a mournful voice Rustum replied,
Fear not, as thou hast said, Sohrab, my son, so shall it be. For I will burn my tents, and quit the host, and bear thee hence with me, and carry thee away to Seistan, and place thee on a bed, and mourn for thee, with the snow-headed Zal and all my friends. And I will lay thee in that lovely earth, and heap a stately mound above thy bones, plant a far-seen pillar over all, and men shall not forget thee in thy grave. And I will spare thy host, yea, let them go, let them all cross the Oxus back in peace. What should I do with slaying any more? For would that all whom I have ever slain might once more be alive, my bitterest foes, and they who were called champions in their time, and through whose death I won that fame I have, and I were nothing but a common man, a poor, mean soldier, and without renown, so thou mightest live too, my son, my son! Or rather, would that I, even I myself, might now be lying on this bloody sand near death, and by an ignorant stroke of thine, not thou of mine, and I might die, not thou, and I, not thou, be borne to Seistan, and Zal might weep above my grave, not thine, and say, O son, I weep thee not too sore, for willingly, I know, thou metst thine end. But now in blood and battles was my youth, and full of blood and battles is my age, and I shall never end this life of blood.
Then at the point of death Sohrab replied,
A life of blood indeed, thou dreadful man, but thou shalt yet have peace. Only not now, not yet. But thou shalt have it on that day, when thou shalt sail in a high-masted ship, thou and the other peers of Kai Khosroo, returning home over the salt blue sea, from laying thy dear master in his grave.
and Rustum gazed on Sohrab's face and said,
Soon be that day, my son, and deep that sea. Till then, if fate so wills, let me endure.
He spoke, and Sohrab smiled on him, and took the spear, and drew it from his side, and eased his wound's imperious anguish. But the blood came welling from the open gash, and life flowed with the stream. All down his cold white side the crimson torrent ran, dim now and soiled, like the soiled tissue of white violets left freshly gathered on their native bank by romping children, whom their nurses call from the hot fields at noon. His head drooped low, his limbs grew slack, motionless white he lay, white with eyes closed only when heavy gasps, deep heavy gasps, quivering through all his frame, convulsed him back to life. He opened them, and fixed them feebly on his father's face, till now all strength was ebbed, and from his limbs unwillingly the spirit fled away, regretting the warm mansion which it left, and youth and bloom, and this delightful world. So on the bloody sand Sohrab lay dead, and the great Rustum drew his horseman's cloak down o'er his face, and sate by his dead son, as those black granite pillars, once high reared by Jemshid in Persepolis to bear his house, now, mid their broken flight of steps, lie prone enormous down the mountain side. So in the sand lay Rustum by his son. And night came down over the solemn waste, and the two gazing hosts, and that sole pair, and darkened all, and a cold fog with night crept from the Oxus. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.